This morning, we encountered the man from Uz. The author of the book of Job remains unknown. Also, the many attempts to date when the text was written have been unsuccessful. The book is obviously an allegory and makes no attempt to appear as history. It's a parable about a man named Job and his encounter with God. It's important for us to keep in mind that Job is not a Jew. He's a non-Jew who believes in God and lives somewhere southeast of Israel. The real location of Uz is also a mystery. As a matter of fact, the book of Job is a book filled with mysteries of one kind or another. And it tries to help the reader more fully grasp the greatest mystery of all, the mystery of God, and the problem of suffering. Today, for a change, I will be incorporating the preaching text within my sermon. The book of Job begins thusly. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and very many servants. So this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. So the parable of Job begins with a portrait of a wealthy man who has prospered exceedingly well. Did Job prosper because he was God-fearing? Did God help Job prosper because of his righteousness? These questions arise as the book of Job opens. So let's return to reading from Job. One day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan, in Hebrew, Ha-Satan, meaning the accuser, also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well. All that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord Sisters and brothers, what is happening here? God boasts about Job to Satan, and Satan challenges God in return. Does Job fear God for nothing? It's a chilling indictment from Satan to God. Satan is suggesting that God is not fit to rule and should certainly give up on humans. After all, if fear of the Lord and piety arise only from a desire to be protected from harm, and a desire for riches, possessions, and blessings from God, then such piety is suspect. Does Job fear God for nothing? The story continues with Satan going down to the earth and either destroying or having raiding parties take all the sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. The many servants are killed, and all of Job's children are crushed in the collapse of a house. After hearing of these calamities, Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. So God is vindicated and boasts of Job again to Satan. Satan agrees that Job hasn't sinned in the midst of all his troubles. But Satan wants another chance at Job. He persuades God to let Satan attack Job's body to see if Job will then curse God. God agrees, but Satan must not kill Job. Satan then goes down to the earth and inflicts loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a piece of pottery with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. Still, Job doesn't curse God. Even though his wife comes out and says, "Would you just curse God and die?" Not good advice. God is again vindicated. The rest of the book of Job consists of so-called friends of his, or four, who come to commiserate with him, but wind up accusing him instead. After spending a week in total silence because of this vision of Job that they came upon, after a week, they begin to accuse him, insisting that God is righteous and would not punish Job like this without good reason. They argue that Job is being punished for his sins or the sins of his ancestors. Job insists on his innocence and finally demands a trial. Job demands an opportunity to bring his case before God. And this is what unfolds. God answers Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? God asked Job many questions about how the world works. And Job is reduced to silence before the majesty and mystery of God. He repents of ever having questioned God. Now, brothers and sisters, I've given us a very condensed version of the book of Job. But the message of Job is as clear today as when it was written. The message of Job is the message of the entire Bible. God is holy and cannot be fully understood by any human. As Isaiah chapter 55 proclaims, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord." And here our brother Paul exhorts in Romans, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are God's judgments and how inscrutable God's ways." The message is clear. Our minds have no chance at grasping the mind of God. We cannot begin to know the mind of God. God is wholly other than we are. God is infinite and we are finite in this life. I fear, though, that many, if not most of us, do not always honor the holiness of God. We imagine we can understand God. We imagine we can somehow discern how God is moving within us and among us. We imagine God is somehow like us. That God is just a higher variation of being human. But I believe this thinking is akin to blasphemy. Brothers and sisters, in order to have a proper relationship with God, we must be willing to give God room to be God, to let God be God. God does not act or feel or think as we do. Let me say this again. God, the infinite Almighty, does not act or feel or think as we do. We need to accept the mystery of God. As the spiritual writer Ronald Rolheiser warns in The Shattered Lantern, Rediscovering a Felt Presence of God, a God who is not allowed to be God beyond our human understanding and imagination will in due time be rejected for precisely those reasons, for being less than God. All attempts to picture God and rationally understand how the existence of such a being can be consistent with everything we see is an enterprise that by definition undercuts our ability to believe in God Thus, for example, he writes, looking at the world from the perspective of the perennial presence of suffering and evil, one could argue, as many do, that either God cannot exist, or, two, if God does exist, God cannot be all-powerful, or is simply incompetent. Our world is too full of evil, physical and moral. We can speak of physical evil in the many destructive and death-producing phenomena within nature, infectious parasites, cancer, natural disasters, and so forth. More serious still is the presence of moral evil, cruelty, even among children. Selfishness, exploitation, rape, murder, insensitivity, and stupidity of multiple sorts. With evil being so widespread, how can we conceive of a benevolent, all-powerful Creator who is lovingly coaxing creation to higher and more loving levels of creation? Sisters and brothers, the simple truth is that we cannot conceive of God at all. The capacity of our minds, the capacity of our brains cannot grasp the ultimate reality of God. The more one tries to grasp the Almighty, the more one is doomed to frustration and failure. The more one tries to speak in God's name, the more one is reduced to silence. God is mystery, and we can never penetrate the mystery of God. We cannot grasp the mystery of God. The best we can do is surrender to it. Faith, brothers and sisters, is not about understanding God. Faith is the willingness to surrender to God, the willingness to trust God even in the darkest night. Now, I'm not speaking here about having a blind trust in God. We've been given our intellects and our brains through the hand of God, so we can surely ponder what we believe God is doing. We can certainly challenge God on the suffering we see all around us. But in the end, we must surrender and let God be God. Either we surrender to God or we give up belief in God. Those are our only two viable options. I choose to surrender to God. I pray that all of us here, that all of our children, that every member of our families do the same. As Rolheiser writes, to let God be God means to undergo the presence of God as a tree undergoes the presence of summer. A tree is brought to bloom by summer. The tree does not capture summer. The tree does not understand summer. The tree simply undergoes summer and blossoms under its presence. Our task, brothers and sisters, is similar to what the tree does with summer, or with autumn for that matter. The tree surrenders to the seasons. So we are to surrender in the same way to God. We cannot try to capture the presence of God. Instead, we're called to celebrate that divine presence and let it do what it will with us. To live in that presence means that finally, along with Job, we say no more and put a finger to our lips.